Well, good evening there, everyone. It's Ben Schokman coming to you from Geneva once again with UPR update number 7. So I feel a little bit like I'm out of Team America, being I'm so ronery. I'm here all of myself. Phil Lynch and Liz Snell have now returned home, and very sadly, Les has come down with a particularly bad flu. So it's been left to me to provide this update for you. I think all of our other updates we've had out and about at the Human Rights Council room or outside the embassy, so I thought we'd come back here to provide you with the last update from the studio, which is essentially our human rights library. You'll be very happy to know, Sarah Joseph, we've got your little Joseph Schultz and Kasten textbook here as well, and I'm sitting among all of these wonderful human rights books. So to give you a quick update on today's proceedings, I went along to the Human Rights Council room once again today, where there was a half an hour session at which the official report on Australia's UPR appearance was adopted. So essentially the publication that came out was this document here. It's not yet available online. We'll send you through some details of when it does become available online, but essentially it's the draft report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of Australia. It's a document which essentially summarises all of the comments and the recommendations that were made during Australia's UPR appearance on Thursday afternoon. It starts off talking a little bit about each of the comments that were made by the countries. There's lots of discussion of the floods that went on. Basically, every single country that took the floor to speak about Australia talked about the floods, offered their condolences to the people of Australia. They then went on to make, in many cases, some positive comments about things that the Australian government has done recently to further protect and promote human rights, but then also address some of their concerns and made some quite specific recommendations. So the purpose of the session this afternoon was essentially for Australia to appear before the Council once again to provide a formal response to those comments, and in particular the recommendations that were made by each of the countries. All in all, according to the official documentation now, there were 53 countries who took the floor to make statements in relation to Australia, and those 53 countries made a total number of recommendations being 145. So quite a large number of recommendations, obviously, and very happily, I guess, from the NGO perspective, those recommendations spanned all 17 of the thematic areas that we had put together in our materials. So I think that's a really great achievement and something that we should certainly all be proud of. The next step, well, before we get on to the next step, I probably should provide the report that the Australian government appeared before the Council today and basically made a decision not to accept, but also not to reject any of the recommendations. Instead, what they said they wanted to do was take another couple of months to give consideration to each of the recommendations and then provide a more formal response at the next Human Rights Council session, which is in June this year. So I guess in some senses, maybe it's a little bit disappointing that the government didn't actually look at whether or not it might be able to accept some of the recommendations that might be perhaps more easier for the government to do. But at the same time, I think this is potentially also a really great opportunity for us as NGOs now to look at continuing to work with the government, continue to lobby them around which of those recommendations that they can and should accept over the next couple of months. So there's a great little window of opportunity for us now as NGOs to continue our pressure and to continue to now actually use the specific recommendations that are contained in this document and talk to the Australian government about what its response to those recommendations will be in terms of whether or not it accepts or rejects them, but perhaps even more importantly, how it will actually respond in terms of implementing those recommendations. So for all of you NGOs back home who've been following this process from afar, I guess the onus is back on you and us now to make sure that we keep the pressure up and that we keep on hassling the government. So as I said, we'll make sure that we send through this document when it's available. We've got meetings obviously with the NGO project group coming up over the next week or two, and I'm pretty sure that the government, which has certainly been talking a lot about working collaboratively with the Australian Human Rights Commission and with NGOs, will continue to do that in terms of the follow-up and implementation. So hoping that everyone now is seeing this as being a really beneficial process and looking forward to participating on the ground in actually lobbying the government and pushing them to actually take some concrete action, which would obviously be a great result from the whole UPR process. So hopefully it's not time to relax now that the process is all over. There's a lot of hard work ahead of us to continue to lobby the government, but perhaps it's just time for me to have just a slight little glass of French red wine here and relax and drink to all of the hard work that not only us here on the ground did, but indeed even more so all of the people who were involved in this process over a 12-month period and came up with the wonderful documentation, the wonderful recommendations, the wonderful lobbying that we're able to do to get the outcome. So here's cheers to all of you, and I'm feeling like a bit of a loser just sitting here drinking on my own now, but guess that's what happens.